Welcome to Talking Legal with TEMPLARS. My name is Femi Oyewole. I'm a senior associate in the Dispute Resolution and International Arbitration Practice Group. I'm here with my colleague Izuchukwu Ohajinwa, who is also a senior associate in the Dispute Resolution and International Arbitration Practice Group. Welcome, Izuchukwu.
Thank you, Femi, and thanks, guys, for joining us.
Right. Today, we'll be speaking about the enforcement of foreign judgments and foreign arbitral awards in Nigeria. So, Izuchukwu, let's start with foreign judgments. Are foreign judgments enforceable in Nigeria?
Yes, foreign judgments are enforceable in Nigeria, and of course, by foreign judgments, we mean judgments obtained in countries other than Nigeria. So yes, they are enforceable in Nigeria, subject to certain limitations required by the law. So
is there a legislative framework for these foreign judgments to be enforced in Nigeria?
Thank you, Femi. So there are two legislative frameworks operating in Nigeria at the moment with respect to foreign judgment or enforcement of foreign judgment. So you have what we call the Reciprocal Enforcement of Judgment Ordinance, which applies to former British colonies. As we all know, Nigeria used to be a British colony before independence in 1960. So we have the Reciprocal Enforcement of Judgment Ordinance of 1958. Okay, this applies to judgments obtained in former British colonies.
So former British colony judgments obtained in those places are still enforceable in Nigeria under that
ordinance. Right. And then you also have the Foreign Judgement Reciprocal Enforcement Act, okay, which gives the Attorney General of the Federation the authority to designate certain countries that confer reciprocity to Nigerian judgments. And by reciprocity, we mean other countries that recognize Nigerian judgments as well will receive the same sort of recognition in Nigeria for purposes of enforcing judgments obtained in those countries.
Okay. So under the Act, if I understand you correctly, where a country agrees to register judgments obtained from Nigeria, the judgments from that country as well will be registerable in Nigeria, subject to the approval of the Attorney General.
Attorney General designation. Okay. Right.
So what type of judgments can be registered? Is it any judgment that are obtained in any foreign country that I will bring to Nigeria?
Well, in Nigeria today, not all judgments are registerable. For a judgment to be registerable in Nigeria, first, it has to be money judgments. And by money judgments, we mean judgments in which money has been awarded to the judgment creditor. That's the beneficiary of the judgment against the judgment debtor. But of course, there are other certain requirements. The judgment would have to be final judgment. So it can't be an interim judgment or interlocutory judgment.
So it can be subject of an appeal.
It can be subject of an appeal. Okay. It has to be a final judgment of the court, and it has to be in writing. And of course, you then have you must obtain the certified true copy of that judgment from the country where you.
Okay. So if I understand this correctly, once I get a money judgment, a sum of money has been awarded to me. It's final and conclusive.
Correct.
And I have a copy of that judgment. I can bring it to Nigeria and register such judgments.
Yes.
Okay. So if I understand this, where there are declaratory reliefs, right, and there's just a part of it that's just the money judgment, can I bring everything to register in Nigeria? It's just
so you would just be enforcing just the monetary bit. So injunctions, declarations will not be enforceable in Nigeria. We're just dealing with just the money bit.
Okay. And is there a time limit? Because I'm conscious of the fact that if I get a money judgment, do I have all the time in the world before I come to Nigeria?
So there's a time limit. Under the ordinance, you are required to register the judgment within 12 months.
Okay. 12 months from the date?
12 months from the date in which judgment was obtained.
Okay.
But under the Act, it gives a longer latitude of about 6 years.
Okay.
To register the judgment.
Okay. And what is the procedure for me to register these judgments in Nigeria? Do I just bring the judgment to Nigeria once I meet all these criteria, and then
So it's a pretty simple procedure to enforce. So you just simply bring an application by way of either an originating motion or a petition, and then with a certified copy of that judgment. That's it, and then you just apply.
Okay. And from your experience, is this a tedious process? How long does it take?
I wouldn't say it's a tedious process. It's fact sensitive, right? So it will depend on whether or not the application will be contentious or not. So an application that is not contentious, in our experience, typically within 3 to 6 months, you would wrap that up. But where it's heavily contested, then the time can span up to a year or even more, depending on how contentious it goes.
And I'm guessing the reason for this is because obviously after I've litigated in a country, when you are coming to enforce that judgment, I don't want to go through the rigors of having to
exactly.
Trial.
So we don't reinvent the wheel and start all over.
It's a fairly straightforward process.
It's a pretty straightforward process.
Okay, so in cases, for example, where I have a judgment and someone has a judgment against me in the foreign country, right? Mm-hmm. What are the reasons why they wouldn't want to come and enforce the judgment against me in Nigeria?
Okay, that's a good question. So the basic reason for enforcement is, so let's say I have a judgment against you in the UK, for instance, but you're based in Nigeria, you do business in Nigeria, you have no assets in the UK. And so you've obtained a judgment in the UK, but it's pretty much a Pyrrhic victory because it's just a paper. So you're trying to get that money that the court has awarded you in the UK. You are now coming to Nigeria where you know that I have assets.
Okay.
I have things that you can leverage on. So you want to employ the coercive powers of the court to get value for the money that has been awarded to you. So the entire process, what it just simply does is to convert that judgment of the UK court as though it were the judgment of a Nigerian court, and it will be enforced as a judgment of a Nigerian court if I still refuse to pay.
Okay, so primarily it is where the debtor...
So where you have a recalcitrant judgment debtor who has refused to pay or just cannot pay because he has no assets there and is trying to evade that place. So yes. Okay,
so in this scenario now, what are the... Is it a given that the court would register the judgment against me? Or can I go to court and say, no, that judgment that you obtained against me, for whatever reason, I don't want it to be enforced? What are the grounds I can rely on?
So there are certain, the court will have to put the judgment through certain tests. So you would typically find, in our experience, you find that people contest the judgment on several grounds. One would be, the court that issued the judgment never even had the jurisdiction to issue that in the first place. So that's one.
Okay.
You could hear, so again, using our example, so you've obtained judgment against me, I'm a Nigerian, but you obtained the judgment in the UK. So you would find that the Nigerian is arguing, well, I'm a Nigerian, I never submitted to the jurisdiction of the UK court. So that could be a basis upon which I can ask the Nigerian court not to register the judgment or to deregister the judgment, as the case may be. If you are contesting that the nature of the judgment in question offends public policy in Nigeria.
Okay. Can you give me an example of that? Like, what sort of judgments would offend public policy?
So if we're having to deal with a judgment that has to deal with something that under Nigerian law is perhaps illegal,
okay,
but under the UK law it's not.
Okay, so for example, oil bunkering, right? If I got a judgment against, if someone bunkered oil in the foreign country and then they got a sum of money awarded on...
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you are trying to enforce that in Nigeria. And my argument is the entire point of this judgment is looking to enforce a contract that flows from oil bunkering, which is a crime in Nigeria, which Nigerian public policy frowns against.
Okay.
You cannot enforce that judgment in Nigeria. So a Nigerian court will simply just stay away from that because it offends Nigerian public policy.
Okay, so where the foreign court doesn't have jurisdiction, secondly, where it offends public policy, are there any
and where the judgment debtor did not submit to the jurisdiction of the foreign court.
Okay, so if I never even appeared in those processes, or I wasn't even served with those processes.
Yeah, that's another ground. So you are saying I was not informed about this proceedings, so I did not defend the proceedings.
Okay, I think that is clear. So the next challenge for me as a foreigner with the foreign judgments will be, so I've obtained a foreign judgment. The court did not agree to set it aside. It's been registered as a judgment of the Nigerian court. How then do I realize, what I'm here for is the money really? How then do I get this money out of Nigeria? What do I do with that judgment that has now been registered as a Nigerian judgment?
So once the judgment is registered, remember I said it converts that judgment as a Nigerian judgment. So if the judgment debtor in Nigeria still refuses to pay, then you can activate the process for enforcement of judgment under the Sheriff and Civil Processes Act in Nigeria. So you'll simply be applying to the court to enforce the judgment. So there are several post-judgment measures for recovering judgment. So maybe the person has monies in his account with either a bank or some third party. You bring what we call a garnishee proceedings to try and attach that money so that you can satisfy the judgment debt. Or if the person has some assets, then you're bringing a writ of forfeit to try and attach the property so you can sell to satisfy the debt.
Okay. So other than this, so that's clear on the enforcement part. So if, for example, I have a judgment, there's a foreign judgment, right, where there's no reciprocal arrangement with Nigeria, and there's also no, it doesn't form part of the British colony. Is there any other way I can enforce this sort of judgment in Nigeria?
You have a judgment that it's not from a British colony.
Yes, so
and the country is not one that has been designated as under the Act as a country that confers reciprocity to Nigerian judgment. Yeah. So yes, so you can file an action on the back of that judgment. So you are bringing an action to say a court has awarded me XYZ amount, albeit this is a court from XYZ country that hasn't been designated as conferring reciprocity. So you can bring what we call a summary judgment procedure. Okay, so that's just simply an application to say this person is indebted to me. He does not have a veritable defense to that, to this, and I want to enforce or take the benefit of that judgment as though it was just a simple contract.
Okay, so other than this, other than the two established means, right, which is the ordinance and the act, if I have a foreign judgment as well, I can bring that judgment and
file an action.
Okay, so I can sue on the basis of that judgment.
Exactly.
And go through the summary judgment route. So what is the benefit of the summary judgment route?
So what that does for you is, as the name itself suggests, summary judgment, you don't have to go through the whole hall of litigation, calling witnesses and all of that. It's just affidavit evidence, the judgment telling you how much is being owed, and then the court weighs whatever defense the other party has. So if the person comes and doesn't offer anything reasonable as to make the court refuse, then the court will simply enter judgment for you on the back of that amount that was awarded to you.
Okay, I think that sounds good. So let's now go into foreign arbitral awards.
Okay.
Arbitral awards, do they enjoy the same statutory regime as foreign judgment, or is there a difference?
So yes, so there are at least two regimes. So it depends on where you're coming from, right? So the Act recognizes foreign judgment to also include
what Act now?
No, the Foreign Judgment Reciprocal Enforcement Act also recognizes foreign awards.
Okay.
As part of, so it defines foreign judgment to include foreign awards.
Okay.
However, the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, which is a completely different regime that deals specifically with arbitration, defines the modus operandi for enforcement of foreign awards. Okay, and so that's a completely different regime, and all it requires you, something similar, is to also bring an application, and then you satisfy the requirements, which is jurisdiction, there was no misconduct by the arbitrator, and once you are able to satisfy those and bring a certified copy of that award, it can be registered in Nigeria. Okay,
so for arbitral awards now, what are the requirements to register an arbitral award in Nigeria?
So, to register an arbitral award, you remember that the entire point of arbitration is that it's based on agreement. So we need to put before the court the arbitration agreement that tells the court that both parties agreed to resort to this arbitration from which you are trying to enforce the award. So you bring a copy of the arbitration agreement, and then you bring a copy of the arbitration award, certified copy of the arbitration award, and then you bring an application by way of either an originating motion to say, okay, you are applying to recognize and enforce the award.
In Nigeria. Yes. So what courts in Nigeria will be vested with this jurisdiction? Do I just bring the arbitration agreement and a certified copy of the award to Nigeria? What courts are vested with jurisdiction?
So the Arbitration and Conciliation Act makes it open to high courts. So you can either go to the Federal High Court or the State High Court. But it's always a judgment call depending on the nature of the award and the subject matter it deals with. It's always more advisable to head to the court in Nigeria that would otherwise have had the subject matter jurisdiction on it.
Okay. Yes. So once so how do I commence this action?
So you bring an application, originating motion, with a copy of the award and a copy of the arbitration agreement. You file that in court for recognition and enforcement.
Okay. And on what grounds can somebody challenge the registration of an award?
So the Act also makes provisions for very limited grounds. So when you are challenging an award, you are not. The court is not sitting as an appellate court over the award again. So the court is not coming to determine whether the award was rightly decided or wrongly decided. Whether in fact, the aphorism for it is you sink or swim with your arbitrator.
Yeah, so I think I've heard people say that whatever your arbitrator decides.
Whatever he decides. So if you go and get yourself an arbitrator who thinks privity of contract is irrelevant, well, you chose your arbitrator. The court is not going to go into the merits or demerits of it. What the court is looking at for are things like, did the arbitrator have the jurisdiction to decide the issues? By jurisdiction now we're talking about, is this part, are these the matters he decided part of what he was asked to decide? Is it outside the arbitration agreement for which the parties agreed to go to arbitration? Did the arbitrator misconduct himself? And when we talk about misconduct now, we're talking about both in the technical sense of it and in the literal sense of it. So misconduct in terms of fraud, misconduct in terms of general conduct of the proceedings that may not have afforded fair hearing to the other party. So a list of other limited things on which you can challenge the basis of enforcement and recognition of an award.
So if I understand you correctly, there are very limited grounds to challenge an award, because an award is good judgment. You either have to give the court compelling grounds, which are already stated in the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, which is misconduct or fraud or lack of jurisdiction, before the court would decide not to register a foreign award in Nigeria.
Yes, so misconduct, basically, that's the broad term. So I'd use a very basic example of one that we handled much more recently that had to deal with an award where the arbitrator issued a more like contradictory. And so I say that in terms of when you say misconduct, it's not just literal in terms, oh, there was fraud, the person was compromised. No, it can be technical. Okay, so in our scenario, we had to deal with a scenario where the arbitrator gave an award or awarded some set of money, sums of money, but had earlier held in the same award that our client was not liable or had not committed a breach. But when he was now awarding monies or compensation, he awarded as though there was a breach. So in that kind of scenario, the court had to intervene to say, this is illogical. Yeah. So on the face of the award itself, the court considered that to be a misconduct. Okay. So that's in the technical sense of it. So those are the kinds of interventions that the court is allowed to have when you're thinking about arbitration.
So after you go through these legal orders and then the court decides to register the foreign award, what next? What are the next steps that you will take? Or does that mean the person is then compelled
to recover?
Yes, to recover the sum.
So if the person still refuses to pay, then you activate, like I said, the Sheriffs and Civil Processes Act.
Which is similar to
which is similar to enforcement of foreign judgment. So at this point, the entire point of recognition, whether it's a foreign award or a foreign judgment, is to convert that award
or judgment
to a judgment of the court. So if the person still refuses to obey the judgment of that court, then the court will employ its coercive powers to obtain value for the award.
Okay. And are these awards, are they subject of any appeal in Nigeria? Can it be subject of an appeal in Nigeria?
The registration and enforcement? Yes. So if the party is uncomfortable, if the party is very uncomfortable with the registration or the basis on which the court allowed the registration, the party has a right of appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, Court of Appeal and Supreme Court.
Okay. And from your experience, what timelines is the process of registering an award? Is it a tedious process, and how long does it take?
No, it's not. It's again just like foreign judgments. It's affidavit laden, so 3 to 6 months. And again, depending on how contentious it gets. If it's not contentious in the matter, we've done some in 3 months or less. Okay. And if it is very contentious, then there is usually no upper limit, so it can span up to a year.
Okay, thank you very much, Izuchukwu. So just to recap, foreign judgments are registerable in Nigeria under 3 separate regimes: one under the Ordinance, British colony, one under the Act, where the country also affords Nigeria a reciprocal arrangement, and the third, which is not really a legal regime from what I understand, is that you can just bring the judgment of the foreign court and sue on the debt in Nigeria. And typically the process for registration of foreign judgments is a fairly straightforward one.
Very straightforward.
Except it is challenged. There are limited grounds for you to challenge this foreign judgments. And foreign awards as well are also registerable in Nigeria, both under the Act and under the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. And typically this process is pretty straightforward. It doesn't take long, except there's a challenge. When the judgments are then registered as a judgment of the Nigerian courts, you can then take steps to enforce these judgments by either garnishing proceedings, writ of 5-year overtaking possession, and all of these are fairly simple procedures in Nigeria.
Very correct.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Izuchukwu. This has been very insightful.
My pleasure, Femi. Thank you.
This has been Talking Legal with Templars. Thank you very much for your time. See you next time.
Thank you, guys.